My husband and I decided that we were going to take a little mini road trip. We were getting tired of all the gray and the clouds and all this rain, and we decided to head eastward to see if we could find a little bit warmer temperatures and maybe even some sunshine. The funny thing is that when we finally set out to leave, the clouds had parted and we actually saw some sun, but we decided just to head on our journey anyway. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and today we were driving a bit of the Columbia River Gorge. I am truly blessed to be able to call this area my home. This is called the Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area. Basically, the gorge is made up of mountains on each side, and the big, huge, mighty Columbia River runs right in between them. The river divides the states of Oregon and Washington, and I am showing you pictures from the Washington side that we drove today. The river in total is about 1,200 miles long. It begins in Canada and empties out into the Pacific Ocean. It's a huge source of hydroelectric power. There are several dams on each throughout the river. The dams throughout the river provide more than half the power to the Pacific Northwest. There's also a lot of train traffic that goes up and down the gorge or throughout the gorge. As we were driving, we tended to keep pace with this train over here to the right. Eventually we lost it, but you can see lots of goods get moved from the coast, the big cities, towards the Midwest. Along the way, there are a lot of small communities, towns. There are also very much tourist attractions. So every year we get a lot of tourists who drive this area. We left that little town and continued to head eastward. You'll notice as we drive how the scenery will begin to change. All this lush green that you see is going to give way to a much drier look. The Cascade Mountain Range runs north and south, and our side where we're at now is very lush, but as we continue, it'll get more desert-like. Eastern Oregon and eastern Washington are both considered desert. It always amazes me that we do not have to travel very far, probably less than an hour, and we go from lush green to desert. The area is also very rich in a lot of history. It was home to many, many different Native American tribes, and the river, the Columbia River, was basically their annual supply of food. It's very rich in salmon, more so than now. There are hatcheries throughout the river that supply the salmon nowadays. In the early 1800s, it was also part of the Lewis and Clark Trail. You can already see how there's a lot more rocky areas and the trees are getting a little bit thinner. Not quite as lush. I used to drive this route to go to some of the towns that are on the Oregon side, and these tunnels were my children's favorite thing to go through. I've kind of sped it up so it doesn't take so long, but there's a series of 5 tunnels here, and it adds more interest to the trip. Here's a good view of the Columbia River with all the trees, and in the way I wasn't able to really get any good shots of the river until this point. There's also a lot of barge traffic along the river, as they also carry goods eastward. This was another little town along the way, smaller than the one before. It gets a lot of tourist activity too. A lot of people, because of the wind that comes through the gorge, a lot of people will do windsurfing. And we get people coming from all over the world who like to windsurf on the Columbia River. And they come to this town and the town that's across the river. Now you can see how rocky it's looking and almost no trees, very few trees. And there's our train again. It got ahead of us. And then we started gaining on him. At this point, we took a break at a rest stop, and you can see how windy it is there with the trees and the white caps on the river. And you can see how dry it's looking. I got out of the car to talk to you, but the wind was blowing so bad that when I replayed the video, you could not hear anything that I was saying. So I decided to skip that. We're getting ready to cross over to Oregon here in a little bit. We are going to be heading to a town called the Dalles. The Dalles also has a lot of interesting history attached to it. There are several bridges that will cross over from Oregon into Washington or Washington into Oregon. And so we just headed out to this one because it's probably one of the last towns, and then it gets to be pretty desolate after you get any farther east. And now we are officially entering Oregon. This town, the Dalles, was historical because it was not quite the end of the Oregon Trail, but it was a major resting point for travelers in their covered wagons coming down. This is where they would end up at. And at this point, they had to go westward to get to the land, to the nearest fort, which was Fort Vancouver. And the journey was quite perilous. They had to take a raft and put their wagons on the raft with their families, all their possessions, all the things, all their worldly possessions onto these rafts. And this was before, of course, the advent of dams, and the river was extremely rough. It had waterfalls, it had currents that were very rough, it had rapids, and it made the trip very, very treacherous. In the course of the journey, as they were navigating down to Fort Vancouver, which is now the city of Vancouver, oftentimes the rafts would overturn and everything was lost. Sometimes lives, everything, all their possessions were lost, and it was very, very difficult. In 1846, they built an overland trail which took them to the city in Oregon, which is now known to be the end of the Oregon Trail, and that city is called Oregon City. But that trail was also very rugged due to the steep mountains and the cliffs, and they sometimes had to lower wagons down by ropes, and so it was a very rugged and difficult journey as well. At this point, we ended our journey eastward and headed back home on the Oregon side. There weren't a lot of places open, and so we didn't really stop anywhere. We were just more interested in just getting away for a few hours and having a nice little drive. There is this island that sits out in the Columbia River, and somebody actually has a house built on that island. And they have a dock and a boat, and that is their only way to get back and forth. And you can see the desert-like scenery has now turned back into the lush forest. We crossed the river back to Washington at a somewhat famous bridge called the Bridge of the Gods. This little town also is where the Pacific Crest Trail ends or begins, depending on which direction you're going. The hiking trail extends from Washington at the Canadian border to California at the Mexican border. And there you can see the bridge. The bridge was built in an area where the river is fairly narrow. Before the dams were built, when the water levels would drop, there was a natural rocky area that would allow the native people there to cross the river on foot. And that is how it got its name, the Bridge of the Gods, because it would only appear at certain times. And you can see it's a toll bridge. There are a few toll bridges and some are not toll bridges along the way. I hope you enjoy taking this little drive with us. If you did, could you please give this video a thumbs up? And if you haven't subscribed to my channel and you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing. I appreciate you all so much, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.